okay, we're going to read this afternoon because it's really important to us that all of us speak and we need to be concise. My name is Nielsen Jenkins and I'll be followed by Michael Lumby and Lachlan Nielsen. This project has been a very long time in the making and we wanted to explain a little bit of the context around how it happened and the relationship between our studios. Mike and I met smoking on a Cape Town fire escape back in the summer of 2011 and stayed in touch over the years, sharing the trials and tribulations of running small architecture practices. We stayed really engaged with each other's project work and would often bounce ideas across continents. Locke and I always found it refreshing to have an outsider's take on our work and vice versa. One morning Mike rang Locke and I while we were on the way for a surf, and he had been asked by a colleague of a past client for a list of Australian architects who he recommended for a large house overlooking the vineyards on the Mornington Peninsula. The colleague had loved Mike's previous project and was keen to hear his recommendations. We rattled off a list of names of our heroes who were more than up to the task, and we hung up. About 3 minutes, Locke turned to me and said, "What on earth are we doing?" And so I began. We got registered down here, and the clients agreed to give us a shot as a team. They're a professional couple, and at that point, their work calendar was divided between Melbourne, Cape Town, and London. Mike was able to manage the meetings while they were that side, and we could get things sorted with consultants that we knew over here. Mike has now emigrated and is a huge part of our studio, and we're now working on projects here and in Cape Town. This project has been a huge learning curve for us in every possible way. We think the complexities of how this project has been delivered have resulted in a richness and rigour in the ideas and their value. Mike, having previously designed for the same latitude but a very different social and political context, and us having designed mostly for subtropics, has meant there has been a constant tension in learning from the specificities of this particular place, from interrogating any preconceived ideas that we may have had, particularly around exposure, refuge and scale. This project has been happening since 2017, and as you can imagine, the international and interstate connections have been even more complex throughout COVID. This has meant that there's been a huge amount of overlap of contributions between architects, engineers, landscape designers, and building contractors. A Scotsman and an English woman originally, our clients lived in an apartment in Melbourne and wanted the project to become a home base for themselves and their family of 4 girls and their future families. They had purchased a spectacular block in Merricks, and their brief described a house which could work for just the 2 of them, but also for the entire family for special occasions such as Christmas holidays and weddings.
The clients had stipulated that the house's architecture must reflect its rural context and tie into the vernacular of the region. With this in mind, we visited the site and started researching on the project. As an outsider, I found myself being intrigued by the typical Australian farmhouse, and perhaps in a naive way began to romanticize it with its low-slung roof, wraparound porch and deep eaves. This as opposed to the masonry farm buildings with punched openings and clipped eaves prevalent in South Africa. I was particularly drawn to how these eaves create a dark line of shadow below a singular roof. With its siting on a prominent hilltop with no other buildings around, we were interested in how we could abstract this characteristic, distilling the notion of an Australian farmhouse into one idea, a line of shadow in the landscape. To achieve this, the roof is conceived of as a singular and sleek element, visible in the landscape and capping this line of shadow. The walls it is placed on, however, are seen as more elemental in nature, extruded and of the ground. 1 meter thick and planted, they project out into the landscape, editing and choreographing views and circulation. Although it's a large house with only 2 permanent residents, the project needs to expand and contract as 4 children with their respective families visit for the holidays. To achieve this, 3/4 of the house can be shut down, allowing all the house's ancillary functions to be experienced simply as a courtyard wall. The front wing then, with all the main living spaces, functions as a simple 1-bedroom pavilion, affording the house a spatial intimacy which belies its size. While this siting affords it the best views, it also means the house is somewhat exposed to the coastal climate of the region. Spread out over a single level, the program of the house is arranged to counter this, creating a large and sheltered courtyard garden in its center. The courtyard becomes the most important room in the house, acting as a reference and refuge from the expansive nature of the outlook, as well as an introspective focal point for the house once night falls. The heft of the walls, deep eave overhangs, and dark ceiling finishes further enhance this experience of refuge within the broader context. In developing the design, the singularity of the external roof form began to be carved internally to create opportunities for daylight and to define rooms within the open plan of the living spaces. Subtle shifts in the section were introduced to manage the natural fall of the site and drop the scale for the bedrooms.
The house is designed as a tool for experience one place within a landscape. It tries to establish connections into an expansive outwards context, but also places equal priority on a more introverted human-scaled landscape, held within the arrangement of the building program. We had done initial landscape sketches which informed the way we laid the building out, but these were taken much further by South African Francesca Watson and then Robin Barlow, who helped with the landscape design. The architecture recedes and the building acts simply as a lens from which to experience the landscape. During the day, the eye is drawn into the distance towards the bay, and when the night falls, the focus shifts inwards towards the held landscape of the courtyard and immediately adjacent to all the living spaces of the house. Every room looks out onto a garden. While most of the projecting walls frame views outwards, when adjacent to more private spaces, they wrap back around to capture private courtyards, giving an intimate space a floor-to-ceiling outlook over the greenery. Siting of the new house occupies the location of an old 80s house that preceded it, and geometries were set out based on existing trees and vineyards. The old driveway entry avenue of elms was retained and repurposed as the main pedestrian entry sequence. The old windbreak of lily pillies to the north of the pool were retained to create a full stop of the house, a second softer courtyard with the wall of the trees as an edge. As the site has no council mains, all of the site's domestic water is captured by the large singular roof and stored in circular concrete water tanks. This familiar item of farming infrastructure is taken through the project as a motif and used throughout the garden spaces as bird baths, a fire pit, and a series of ponds, each becoming a point of reference within the landscape. This is obviously an expensive and large project. From the outset though, budget was prioritised towards landscape and the connection to it. Material selection and detailing aimed to minimise maintenance and decoration, and recede from the intended experience of the occupant.